So we did 6 businesses, 3 failed and 3 worked. And I guess it's a bit like waiting for a bus. You think you're almost there. And as you do more and more businesses, you feel you've learned so much more and you're in a much better position to succeed than you were when you started out with your first business, that you just keep persevering. And it gets tough at times because financially you get constrained and you have conversations about going back and getting a real job, as my wife called it for a while. But we kept going and luckily we did. Choosing a domain name's quite challenging. There's also the affordability and availability of it. And generally, if you're going to come up with anything that's short and pronounceable, it's almost certainly not going to be available. So then it's a matter of how much you can buy it for, or you can try and come up with something quite contrived, which often is more specific to the purpose of the site. I quite like short names that aren't specific. But Birthday Alarm, for example, was a domain name that we managed to buy for however much it was, $10. It wasn't registered at the time. But it's quite long and very specific to the purpose. But it can be constraining too, because if you launch a site with one thing in mind and the name is very specific to that one thing, then as soon as you want to branch out and do something else with it, the domain name tends not to work anymore. It's not that hard to make money from a social network. People often say there's sort of no money in it and it's a loss-making business, but we were profitable pretty much from the beginning and at worst break even. So it's not as difficult as you'd imagine, and we were never that invasive with advertising. But the key thing about a social network is you're not paying for advertising because it's all word of mouth, and you're not paying for content because it's user-generated content. So 2 of the biggest expenses in a lot of traditional businesses just don't exist. What you are paying for is a lot of technology, a lot of infrastructure. You get a huge amount of traffic. So for the amount of traffic you get, your ad revenue is not particularly high per page view, but there's so much of it that you can actually make quite good money quite easily. So it wasn't ever a challenge. We were limited to primarily, I think, 1 ad per page. We didn't do the kind of MySpace approach of 2 or 3 ads per page. We raised money late on in the evolution of the site. So I think at the time we were, doing about 100 million page views a day, north of 100 million. We were still a small company. I think there were only 7 of us, myself and 1 other technical person, then 5 other people. But we'd self-financed it and we were cash flow positive at the time, which put us in a good position for raising money because we were in no way desperate for the money. And could negotiate terms that were more beneficial than had we tried to raise money early on. The reason we raised it was threefold. So one was the positioning in the marketplace of being funded by a tier 1 VC firm. Another was just cash flow. We wanted a bit of a war chest so that we could grow aggressively. And although we were cash flow positive, we weren't confident enough to go out and employ 20 people and be confident that we could remain cash flow positive. So we wanted to grow aggressively without worrying about short-term cash flow. And then 3, just for the advice of the VC firm themselves, of having been through or seen this many companies go through the things we were going through and being able to advise us on that. It also can make employing people easier because they're a certain degree. Some people actually like the high-risk companies and actually want to join a company that doesn't have VC, but probably more people like joining a company where they feel there's some external validation that the company is on a path to success. Building an in-house ad sales team is quite difficult to do. First of all, you need quite a lot of traffic to justify doing it, because it's not just the salespeople, you need the account managers and ad operations and so forth. And it's also a bit of a distraction, again, from what you're really trying to do. So we wanted to focus on building the site. And the easiest thing was, we needed to make some money to cover the operational costs, was just to stick adverts up from ad agencies, which literally you just take the tags and stick them on the page. It was incredibly easy to do. And we didn't have to go worrying about employing people in the office space for them and everything that goes alongside having an ad sales team. I think you'll find far more interesting revenue models coming out. And part of the reason that you've probably not seen them so far is it's been a big land grab for social networks, and innovating on business models is a time-consuming distraction from it. So the easy thing to do is put advertising up because everyone understands it and it's a done deal. But if you try and innovate beyond that, it can become time-consuming and distracting from growing the community itself. But I think you'll see amongst the different networks more and more ideas, and I think you'll find eventually that advertising is always going to be an important part of it, but it may not be the lead revenue generator for them. Well, the interesting thing about growing a community is that you're sort of living within it as you grow it. So the community can almost use the tools of the community themselves to voice their opinion back to you. So you can sense the vibe of the community at any one time. So if people are frustrated by something that you've done, you tend to hear it quite quickly through the community itself. And change is often difficult if you make changes within a community, whether you're taking something away or adding something. You have to be kind of very sensitive to how people interpret that. So sometimes you're purely adding something to make it better, but people are frustrated by the change that you've made. In any social network, you're going to get social behavior that happens in real life. So in the same way that the kids can be mean to each other at school, they're going to be mean to each other on a social network. So in terms of the host of the network, you've got to clearly take a responsible attitude, but you can't entirely prevent it from happening in the first place. So you can have guidelines and recommend that people don't do it. But when people do it, you need the tools to enable people to complain, and then you need to be able to take actions when those complaints happen. So if someone's consistently breaking the rules, as it were, then you have the ability to cancel their membership. And for most people who've uploaded hundreds of photos and connected with all their friends, that's actually a pretty bothersome thing to happen to them. So that tends to work as a deterrent. But it's difficult because you often get involved between people's personal fallouts. If two people aren't getting on, we can't step in and help them get on with each other. So everything was very informal. We try to keep the hierarchy flat. I didn't have a private office, so I always sat in the middle of all the engineers in a big sort of sea of open desks. There were no cubicles, so you could see everyone else in the office from pretty much any point. So we tried to keep that kind of open, flat hierarchy. There's naturally you end up with a little bit more process because you just got more and more people. And whereas when you're a very, very small team, you know exactly what's going on with everyone else because you're in earshot of everyone else. As you get bigger, you don't necessarily know what's going on at the other end of the office. So you end up with more meetings and opportunities for people to update people. But at the same time, we try to keep everything very open. We'd have a weekly lunch meeting where I would stand up and talk about everything that was going on, and anyone could ask any question to find out what's going on. Well, valuing a business is really difficult to do, particularly web businesses, and they're not. The position we were in, you weren't going to value it purely based on revenue, because the rate of growth was so rapid, and the potential value of the network wasn't something that we'd exploited. As I mentioned, we were not focused on how much money we can make out of it. So it's just very, very difficult to value it, and ultimately it's always what someone's willing to pay. So we got an indication of what various people were willing to pay, and that's what it came out at.